On her own son's birthday, my sister stood in front of everyone and announced that the baby was my husband's child and that she would be taking half of my house. But just one day later, that triumphant smile disappeared completely the moment she walked into my home. My name is Bridget Preston, and at 34, I never thought I would become a widow. 3 months ago, on an ordinary morning, I lost Henry, the husband I had for 11 years, my best friend, the person who walked with me through every dream we ever built together. He went to work and complained about a headache, insisting it was just a migraine, even though I told him he should stay home. By the time the hospital called 4 hours later, he was gone. They said he had a brain aneurysm, sudden, painless. The funeral was just a blur of black clothes and well-meaning but hollow condolences, and the strange, obvious absence of my sister, Sloane. She showed up briefly at the service, stayed maybe 10 minutes, then disappeared without any explanation. I was too numb with grief to question it, too exhausted from trying to stay composed in front of 300 mourners, to even wonder why my only sister didn't stay when I needed her most. Now, a week later somehow, I have to pull myself together to attend Wyatt's birthday party. My mother had begged me over the phone the night before, her voice carrying that guilty tone of a mother that had been drilled into me since childhood. Bridget, honey, I know you're grieving. We all are. But Wyatt is your nephew. He only turns one once, and Henry would want you to be with your family. You know how he felt about family. At least she was right about that last part. Henry was all about family, even when my family didn't really deserve it. He was the one who encouraged me to stay connected with Sloane, despite the years of competition, turmoil, and the tiring reality of being the younger sister who watched our parents pour more affection into her. She's your only sister, he would gently remind me. Family matters, even when it's complicated. So I went. I put on a navy blue dress that wasn't as heavy as black, did just enough makeup to hide the worst of the sleepless nights, then drove to Sloane's rental house on the other side of town with a carefully wrapped gift on the passenger seat and a knot of dread tightening in my stomach at the thought of seeing my family. Henry and I met 12 years ago at a charity fundraiser neither of us wanted to attend. He was a corporate attorney with a quiet way about him. I worked in nonprofit development, doing my best to make a difference in a system that seemed built to stop that from happening. We spent 3 hours talking in a corner while the event carried on around us, and when he asked for my number, I knew something important was about to begin. 8 months later, he proposed to me on a pedestrian bridge in Boston Common, nervous and tender at the same time, with the ring he had chosen himself. 4 months after that, we were married in a small ceremony with the people closest to us, feeling perfect because it was ours. Intimate, sincere, full of the people who actually mattered. We bought the Victorian house in Louisburg Square for $1 million, a huge stretch, but worth it for the original woodwork, the small backyard garden, and the extra bedrooms we planned to turn into kids' rooms. We painted the nursery soft pink and pale green. We researched the best schools. We dreamed about the kinds of specific things young couples dream about when they still believe the future will go the way they planned. But the future had other ideas. 3 years of trying to conceive naturally turned into 2 years of infertility treatments. Shots, hormones, the crushing disappointment of negative pregnancy tests, and failed IVF cycles. We spent more than $90,000 and countless tears before Henry finally held my hand one evening as we sat on the porch swing and said, "We can still have a beautiful life, Bridget. You and me. That's enough. We are enough." So we rebuilt the dream. We poured ourselves into our careers. We renovated the house, turning the kids' rooms into home offices and a library. We traveled. We built a full, meaningful life, even if it turned out nothing like the one we had first imagined. Meanwhile, Sloane lived an entirely different kind of life. 4 years younger than me, she had been the wild child of our family for as long as I could remember. Impulsive, dramatic, constantly spiraling into crises that needed my parents' love and rescue, at least the way they saw it. My parents had bailed her out financially so many times I lost count, paying her rent when she couldn't, covering credit card debt from impulsive shopping sprees and bad decisions, smoothing over the fallout from choices that anyone else her age would have been expected to handle on their own. That dynamic fed a long, exhausting competition between us, something I never wanted but could never escape. Sloane took my stability as a silent judgment of her chaos. I saw her chaos as draining and entirely self-inflicted. Henry always encouraged me to be patient, to be generous with my compassion, and to remember that everyone fights their battles in different ways. 2 years ago, Sloane started dating Ryan, someone she met at a club downtown. Their relationship was rocky from the start. Dramatic fights, tearful reconciliations, social media posts that swung between declarations of eternal love and cryptic hints about betrayal. My parents worried. I kept my distance, having long learned that getting involved in Sloane's tragic romances only led to bad endings for everyone. Then, at Thanksgiving dinner 18 months ago, Sloane showed up late, Ryan conspicuously absent, and announced she was pregnant. I felt the news like a punch to the gut. After all the struggles, all the grief, all the expensive failures Henry and I had been through, my sister had so easily achieved the one thing we wanted most. I smiled and congratulated her because that was the right thing to do, forcing myself to swallow the petty, shameful jealousy, even as it gnawed at me. Wyatt was born healthy the following July, a sweet baby with dark eyes and a nose that looked just like Sloane's. I was determined to be the best aunt I could be, not letting the complicated feelings of not being able to have children stop me from loving him. I brought food and baby clothes, offered to babysit, and spent hours helping Sloane survive the harsh reality of being a first-time mother. She always seemed overwhelmed, struggling with the basic tasks of caring for a newborn in ways that worried me. Ryan was only around occasionally, more focused on his phone, games, and private calls than on his own son. I stepped in to fill the gaps where Sloane couldn't, but not too much. She had her pride and never accepted too much help, even when it was obvious she needed it. What was interesting was how Henry always kept a distance from Wyatt. He would politely hold the baby when asked, but never initiated, never cuddled him. I assumed it was because of our struggles with having children, thinking it hurt him too much to be close to a baby when we couldn't have one ourselves. I never pushed, understanding that everyone faces their pain differently. Then came the terrible day, 3 months ago. Henry woke up with a headache, stronger than usual, but not unheard of. He'd always been prone to migraines. I suggested he stay home, call the office, but he insisted he had an important meeting with a client and couldn't miss it. "It's just a migraine, Bridget. I'll take something and I'll be fine. Tonight we'll go out to dinner, okay?" Those were the last words my husband ever said to me. He never called after the meeting. By 2 in the afternoon, his assistant contacted me to say they found him collapsed in the courthouse parking lot. The paramedics worked on him for 18 minutes. He was pronounced dead at the hospital before I could get across the city to say goodbye. The days after he died were awful, hazy days when I forced myself to do the daily, necessary things, even though my mind was filled only with him. There were calls to make, arrangements to finish, and a funeral to plan for a man who had promised to walk through life with me. Friends and colleagues surrounded me with support, but my family felt strangely distant. My parents, of course, came to the funeral, but they seemed distracted, uncomfortable. Sloane arrived late, sat in the back, and left before the service even began. She didn't help, didn't support, didn't even talk to me except for a brief, awkward hug that felt more like an obligation than something real. At the time, I was too heartbroken to make sense of it. I was just trying to survive each hour, each day, each week, without the person who had been my anchor for 12 years. On the morning of Wyatt's first birthday party, my mother called again to make sure I was still coming. There was something tense, worried in her voice, something that didn't match the idea of a child's birthday party. "Mom, I told you I'd be there." "Good, very good. It'll be wonderful to have the whole family together." I should have caught the warning in those words. I should have trusted the instinct whispering that something was wrong. Instead, I picked up the carefully wrapped gift, a beautiful wooden puzzle set, and a stack of board books, and drove across town to Sloane's small rental house with its overgrown lawn and peeling paint. The party had already started when I arrived, 30 minutes later than planned because I sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to gather myself enough to walk inside. The little house was crowded with people I barely knew: Sloane's friends, neighbors, and a few relatives. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. Some of my relatives were scattered around the rooms, but the atmosphere felt strange, tense, people whispering in corners, conversations cutting off the moment I stepped inside. My parents stood near the kitchen, both looking uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite describe. They hugged me too tightly, their voices too cheerful when they asked how I was doing. Wyatt sat in a high chair, his face smeared with cake, blissfully unaware of the adult tension hanging thick in the air. Sloane looked different, not just dressed up for the party, but glowing with a kind of energy I hadn't seen in her since before Wyatt was born. She wore a new dress that looked expensive, her hair and makeup done with a level of care that felt excessive for a 1-year-old's birthday party. She kept glancing at me with an expression I couldn't decode, something between excitement and nerves. When she called for everyone's attention, tapping a knife against a glass like someone giving a wedding toast, my stomach tightened with dread. "Thank you all so much for coming to Wyatt's first birthday," she began, her voice carrying easily across the crowded living room. "It means a lot to have you here for such an important milestone. But before we cut the cake, I have something important to share, something I've kept hidden for too long." The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes turned to her, and then, almost immediately, I felt 30 pairs shift onto me, waiting for my reaction to words I hadn't even heard yet. "Wyatt is not Ryan's son," Sloane announced, her voice even and practiced, like she had rehearsed this moment for a long time. "The truth is that Bridget's husband, Henry, and I had a brief night together 2 years ago. It was a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness that we both regretted immediately. But the consequence of that mistake is Wyatt. Henry is his biological father." The world tilted. The sounds around me turned distant, muffled, as if I were underwater. I watched Sloane's mouth moving, but could barely process the words that kept coming out of it. "I know this is awful, and I know the timing is terrible," she continued, pulling a neatly folded piece of paper from her purse. "But I can't keep hiding the truth. Henry knew Wyatt was his son. Before he died, he set up a trust to provide for him. This document proves it. He wanted Wyatt to be taken care of. He designated that half of the house in Louisburg Square would belong to his son as part of his inheritance." She held the paper up like it was scripture, as if it justified everything she had just done. Everyone in the room turned to stare at me, waiting for my reaction. Shock, tears, rage, denial, something that would confirm this devastating truth. Instead, I felt something completely unexpected: the urge to laugh. At first, it pressed hard against my chest, a tightening that wasn't grief, but something close to hysteria. I pressed my lips together, trying to hold it in, but a smile still tugged at the corner of my mouth, no matter how hard I tried. The absurdity of it all was almost too much to bear. "Oh," I replied calmly, my voice still steady. "I see." Sloane blinked, clearly thrown off by how mild my reaction was. It was obvious she had prepared herself for theatrics. Maybe she had pictured tears, rage, or a complete breakdown. My composure seemed to unsettle her more than anger ever could. "May I see that will, Sloane?" I asked politely, reaching out my hand. She hesitated, then handed me the folded paper with obvious reluctance. I opened it carefully, scanning the typed lines with a growing sense of professional clarity. Even in shock, after years of working with legal documents, the inconsistencies were obvious. The language was wrong, too imprecise, missing the standard legal terminology Henry's real attorney would have used. The signature was clearly forged, shaped to look like Henry's handwriting, but missing the unique details that made it his. Even the paper was wrong, too bright, Too new, nothing like the cream-colored letterhead used by Henry's actual law firm. "Thank you for sharing this with me," I said, folding the document and handing it back. "I think I need to go now." "That's it?" Sloane asked, her voice pitching upward with confusion and something like panic. "You're not going to say anything? You don't want to talk about this?" "Not right now," I answered, deliberately walking toward the door with steady calm. "Today is Wyatt's birthday. We don't need to ruin his party with family drama. We can discuss this later, privately." I could feel the whole room watching as I stepped out, hearing the whispering erupt the moment the door closed behind me. I made it to my car, got inside, locked the doors, and finally let the laughter burst out. A wild, broken laugh, tears rolling down my cheeks from the sheer absurdity, cruelty, and shamelessness of my own family. Because Sloane had no idea what the truth was. She had no idea what she had just walked into, no idea why her plan was about to fall apart so spectacularly. The real story, the one Sloane didn't know, began 3 years ago, at a dinner at our house. I had been stuck in meetings at the office when Henry came upstairs, looking worried enough that I immediately sensed something was wrong. "Something happened tonight that you need to know," he said, sitting on the edge of my desk. "While you were downstairs, Sloane came on to me." The words sounded impossible at first. "What do you mean, came on to you?" "She cornered me in the kitchen and told me she'd always found me attractive. She said something about you not appreciating me the way she does. Then she tried to kiss me." A cold shock ran down my spine. "What did you do?" "I stepped back immediately and told her I was married to you and that nothing like that would ever happen. She brushed it off, blamed it on the alcohol. But Bridget, it wasn't a joke. She was serious," Henry said. "At first, we convinced ourselves it was the alcohol and bad judgment, telling ourselves it was a one-time thing brought on by too much drinking and Sloane's lifelong habit of competing with me over everything. But it wasn't. It was only the beginning. A CT6. In the months that followed, Sloane became increasingly tense. She found every possible excuse to make inappropriate physical contact. Loose, lingering hugs, hooking her arm through Henry's, standing too close at my family's gatherings. She texted him, at first with harmless flirtiness. She showed up unannounced at his law office, saying she was in the neighborhood and wanted to grab coffee. She sent late-night messages asking if he ever thought about what if. What if he had met her first? What if things had turned out differently? Henry held his ground the entire time and told me everything immediately. We kept all of that proof because even then, something in both of us knew that one day we might need it. When I confronted my parents about Sloane's behavior, they dismissed every concern we raised. "Sloane's just being friendly," my mother insisted. "She doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." My father was more blunt. "Are you sure Henry isn't misunderstanding? Sloane's always been affectionate." Their refusal to acknowledge the truth made the decision easier. Henry and I put distance between ourselves and Sloane. We stopped hosting family dinners. We avoided any situation where the two of them might end up alone together. After one particularly explicit message, a message that couldn't possibly be misinterpreted, Henry blocked her number completely. Then, about 2.5 years ago, Henry's health issues forced him to make a final decision that would protect both of us. During a surgical consultation, the doctor explained that his condition had progressed to the point where a vasectomy would be the medically recommended treatment. After years of failed fertility treatments and the reality that pregnancy seemed impossible, we agreed this was the best choice for Henry's long-term health. The procedure was done quietly, without fanfare, before Sloane met her new boyfriend and conceived Wyatt. We didn't tell anyone. It was private medical information, and we saw no reason to share it with family members who would only ask painful questions or give unwanted opinions about our future children. After Henry recovered, he made a prediction that seemed paranoid at the time, but later proved eerily accurate. "Sloane hasn't stopped," he said one night while we sat in the library. "I know your parents will always defend her, but I have a feeling someday she'll try something more extreme. She's not stable, Bridget, and I'm scared you're going to get hurt. The next day, he made an appointment with our family attorney, Preston Caldwell. I went with him as he laid out everything: the inappropriate behavior, the growing tension, the saved messages, and his recent surgery. Henry told Preston, "I want it documented that I had a vasectomy on this date, making me unable to father children biologically afterward. I want the text messages and my notes about Sloane's behavior stored with my legal documents, and I want my will updated to clearly state that everything belongs to Bridget." Preston took careful notes, asked detailed questions, then offered advice that felt excessive at the time, but later turned out to be invaluable. "Build a full record," he said. "Medical records, communications, journals, everything dated and organized. Store multiple copies in different locations." We left that meeting feeling a little foolish, like we were overreacting to a family issue that would probably resolve itself. Even so, we made the record, storing the originals in a bank safe deposit box and keeping several copies. CT7. The morning after Wyatt's birthday party, I drove straight to that bank. My hands trembled as I opened the safe deposit box where Henry and I had stored our most important documents. Inside were our records. The file contained everything: Henry's legitimate will, leaving his entire estate to me with no mention of any children; his medical records from his vasectomy, complete with the doctor's notes and the surgical report that made it biologically impossible for him to have fathered Wyatt; a leather journal documenting every inappropriate interaction with Sloane, each entry dated and detailed; printed messages, time-stamped screenshots preserved carefully, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in Henry's unmistakable handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dearest Bridget, I hope that many years from now we grow old together and never need these records. But if not, if the worst has happened and your sister or your family has tried to hurt you in my absence, please know I will always protect you. Use these documents to defend yourself. Don't let guilt or family pressure make you accept lies. I love you more than words, more than time, more than death. Whatever happens, whatever anyone says, know that you are my only love, my only choice, the only family that truly matters to me. Forever, Henry." I sat in that vault and sobbed, because my husband loved me enough to protect me even after death, because my parents and my sister had become strangers willing to deceive and destroy my husband's reputation for money, and because an innocent little boy would one day learn the awful truth about his mother. When I could breathe again, I took all the evidence to see Preston Caldwell. His office was just as I remembered: quiet, professional, lined with law books that probably cost more than most people's cars. Preston greeted me with genuine sympathy, condolences that felt real, not perfunctory. As I told him what had happened at the party, his expression shifted from compassion to a restrained professional anger. I handed him the photo of the forged will I had taken before leaving the party. He reviewed it for less than 30 seconds before shaking his head. "This is amateur work," he said flatly. "The language doesn't align with any legitimate estate documents. The signature wouldn't survive basic forensic analysis. But what she is doing is deeply concerning. This behavior fits multiple felony offenses." I laid out everything else: Henry's real will, the medical records proving the vasectomy, the journal detailing Sloane's conduct, the saved messages. Preston examined every document carefully, his face growing more serious. "Henry was incredibly thorough," he noted. "The medical records alone completely disprove any claim of paternity. The timeline makes it biologically impossible." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "I don't want to destroy her publicly, but I can't let her destroy Henry's name and steal half my house over an affair that never happened and a forged will." Preston suggested hiring a private investigator to gather more information about Sloane's current situation and her motives. He recommended Marcus Riley, a former police detective now specializing in discreet investigations. Within 48 hours, Marcus pieced together a picture that was both heartbreaking and horrifying. Sloane was drowning in debt. She owed more than $75,000 in credit cards, medical bills, and personal loans. She was facing eviction for 3 months of unpaid rent. Ryan had left her 6 weeks earlier and already had a new girlfriend, and that new girlfriend was 6 months pregnant, meaning he now had to pay minimum child support, and his income couldn't stretch across two families, two women. Wyatt was receiving ongoing medical care for a mild heart condition that required monitoring and occasional intervention. But worse than the financial desperation were the messages Marcus uncovered. Conversations between Sloane and my parents. They had outlined the entire plan. "I'll tell everyone Wyatt is Henry's at the birthday," one message read. "Bridget doesn't deserve that perfect life. It's time I get my share of Henry's money." Another message, sent 2 days before the party. "I made a will that looks real. She won't know the difference. Once I announce it in front of everyone, she'll have to give in to avoid the scandal." The cruelty was staggering. My sister, along with my parents, had calculated exactly how to cause maximum damage. A public announcement timed when I was grieving, a forged document designed to pressure me into settling, and a willingness to destroy Henry's reputation and the memory of our marriage for money. Marcus also discovered that Ryan Martin, Wyatt's biological father, had other relationships and other children long before he met my sister, children he had abandoned and refused to support. I sat in Preston's office reading Marcus's report, feeling both betrayal and grief. My sister was desperate and making terrible choices, but Wyatt, caught between his mother's instability and his father's neglect, was the one suffering most. "What are my options?" I asked Preston. "Legally, you have several. You can pursue criminal charges for forgery and fraud. Both are felonies carrying serious prison time. You can sue for defamation, because her statements harmed Henry's reputation and your own. Or you can confront her yourself, present the evidence, and negotiate an arrangement you can live with." I spent 3 days thinking through those options. I talked with my therapist, Dr. Meredith Hayes, whom I had been seeing since Henry died. She helped me navigate the tension between justice and compassion. "Compassion doesn't mean letting yourself be victimized," Dr. Chen reminded me. "You can care about Wyatt's well-being without accepting your sister's mistreatment. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're necessary." I decided on a private confrontation. I would give Sloane a choice, face the legal consequences of her actions, or accept a compromise that protected Wyatt, but still held her accountable. The next morning, I called Sloane and asked to meet. "We need to talk about the will and about Wyatt's father," I said, my voice calm. "Can you come to my house tomorrow afternoon, around 2? "I knew you'd come around," she replied, sounding smug as if she had already won. "I'll be there. We can discuss the details about transferring ownership of the house." I prepared carefully. I arranged the documents in deliberate order. I set up a small recording device. I called Preston so he would be ready if legal intervention became necessary. Right at 2, Sloane arrived wearing expensive clothes I was certain she couldn't afford, and carrying the confident, expectant expression that made my stomach twist. "Before we start," I said calmly, "I want to record this conversation for legal purposes. Do you consent to being recorded?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Fine, whatever. Let's just get this over with." I started the recording. "I want to begin by understanding exactly what you claim happened between you and Henry," I said. "Can you tell me about this supposed affair Sloane launched into a rehearsed story, a tale of forbidden attraction, a weekend when I was supposedly on a work trip, hotel rooms, secret meetings?" She spoke with a polished confidence, like she had repeated this lie so many times she had begun to believe it. I listened without interrupting, then began asking specific questions. Which hotel? What room? What was Henry wearing? What were his habits, preferences? The small, intimate details only someone truly close to him would know. Her answers grew increasingly vague and contradictory. She couldn't remember the hotel name. The room number changed every time she mentioned it. She described behaviors and preferences completely unlike Henry. "What does it matter?" she snapped, finally, her irritation overtaking her confidence. "Wyatt is Henry's son. The will proves Henry knew that. That's what matters. Actually, I said evenly, opening the folder in front of me, both of those claims can be proven false. I slid the medical records across the table. 2 years before Wyatt was conceived, Henry had a vasectomy. It's documented in the surgical report from the hospital. Medically, he could not have fathered a child after that procedure. I watched the color drain from Sloane's face as she stared at the documents. These could be fake, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. They're not. Henry's surgeon is willing to testify if needed. His medical records are on file. His insurance claim records the procedure. It's indisputable. I pulled out the next document, Henry's legitimate will. This is Henry's actual will, drafted by his attorney and properly witnessed. Her hands were shaking now. The document you presented at the party, I continued, is forged. Creating a fraudulent will can result in up to 5 years in prison. I have the original here, and I had a forensic document examiner compare Henry's real signature to the signature on your fake will. They don't match. I laid out the rest systematically, Henry's journal, documenting every inappropriate advance she'd made. The saved messages, Marcus's investigation, reporting her financial desperation, and the shocking conversations she had with my parents about the plan to defraud me. I know everything, Sloane. The question now is what happens next. She sat in silence for a long time. Then she began to cry, not soft tears, but deep, broken sobs that sounded like they came from someplace hopeless and shattered. I didn't know what else to do, she gasped between sobs. I'm about to lose the house. Wyatt needs medications I can't afford. Ryan is gone and he's never coming back. I have so much debt I can't see a way out. And Ryan, he suggested it. So you decided to take his advice and destroy my husband's name? I asked, my voice sharpening. To tell everyone he cheated on me, to forge legal documents and commit fraud. I was desperate, she screamed, her grief twisting into anger. You have everything, Bridget. The perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect life. What do I have left? A child with a heart condition, a mountain of debt, and a man who betrayed me. I was just trying to save my son. Her raw honesty hung between us. Wyatt is Ryan's son. You know, he has other children too, right? I asked, my voice gentler. She nodded, tears still streaming. Yeah, I found out later. And the will, who created it? Ryan helped me make it up. I thought if I announced it publicly, you'd be too embarrassed to fight it. We thought you'd settle to avoid a scandal. I turned off the recorder and leaned back in my chair, looking at the woman who was my sister, but suddenly felt like a stranger. I could prosecute, I said quietly. What you did was illegal, cruel, and calculated. You could go to prison. But that would hurt Wyatt the most. And no matter what, he's still a child, my nephew. I love him. Sloane looked up, hope and fear tangled across her face. So what happens now? I continued. You will tell the truth, all of it. You will publicly admit that you lied about the affair, that Wyatt is not Henry's son, and that Ryan helped forge the will. And then what she whispered. Ryan will go to prison. We still won't have a home. Wyatt still won't have money for his medical treatment. In exchange for your full confession, and for you and Ryan appearing in court, I'll help you. I will set up a trust fund for Wyatt's educational and medical needs. You, as someone manipulated and as a single mother, could get probation. I'll help you find stable housing. I'll provide guidance and some financial support while you get on your feet. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Why would you do that? Not for you, I said honestly, for Wyatt. Because he deserves stability. And because, despite everything, Henry would want me to take care of his nephew. But there will be conditions, financial counseling, steady employment, and you will allow me to be involved in Wyatt's life. And your boyfriend, Ryan, will have to face the law. If you violate any of these conditions, the support stops immediately. 3 days later, we gathered for dinner at my parents' house. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. I had insisted on it, telling them this conversation needed to happen with everyone present. Sloane arrived pale and deflated. My parents looked anxious. I turned on the recorder with everyone's consent and asked Sloane to say what she needed to say. Her voice shook as she spoke. I lied about Wyatt being Henry's son. Henry and I never had an affair. Wyatt is Ryan's son. Ryan and I forged the will to try to get money from Bridget. My parents were silent. I could see the instinct rising in them to excuse her behavior, but I didn't allow it. No, Mom, I said firmly. We're not doing excuses this time. What Sloane did is a crime. I have enough evidence to put her and both of you behind bars. But I'm choosing forgiveness not for you or for her, but for Wyatt. I explained the agreement, the trust fund, the conditions, the requirements for accountability. That night, we set new boundaries between me and my parents, and for how this family would function going forward. It was uncomfortable and painful, but necessary. 3 weeks after that final confrontation at my parents' house, everything fell into place, cold, final, irreversible. Sloane received 3 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, mandatory parenting classes, and financial counseling, and a restriction that she could not leave Massachusetts. On the day of sentencing, Sloane wore a simple gray dress, her hair in a low ponytail, no makeup. She didn't cry in front of the court, but when the judge read the clause stating that she could lose temporary custody if she violated any terms, her shoulders trembled once sharply. Wyatt sat in the front row, not understanding anything, holding tightly to the stuffed dinosaur I had given him for his birthday the year before. Ryan wasn't so lucky. The evidence Sloane provided voicemail recordings, plus screenshots of him sending her samples of Henry's signature, taken from old contracts, took the jury only 47 minutes to convict him. 28 months in federal prison for instructing her to forge a will and for dodging nearly $70,000 in child support for 3 children in 3 different states. His accounts seized, his pickup truck auctioned, and even after his release, he would have to surrender 20% of his wages for 5 years of supervised probation. That amount would be automatically directed toward child support for Wyatt and his 2 other children. The day Ryan was taken away, he glanced back at Sloane one last time. She didn't look back. A year after Henry left life, didn't return to what it once was, but it learned how to breathe steadily again. Wyatt was growing so fast, his laughter now like a simple equation that softened my heart. The doctor said his heart was doing better, and Wyatt's trust fund had covered his medical needs and secured his future, a kind of safety net for an innocent child, standing in the debris of the adults around him. Sloane lived under probation, went to work on time, paid her debts month by month, and sometimes she came to my house with a homemade cake, the 2 of us exchanging short sentences while avoiding eye contact. But the silences no longer held knives, only apologies that hadn't yet found words. Ryan had paid for his irresponsibility in the courtroom, and the news of his sentence was read out like a cold final period we no longer felt the need to revisit. I founded the Henry Preston Memorial Fund not to show off, but to turn his love into concrete action, a mental health support program for couples dealing with infertility, a scholarship for social workers, and small workshops where I invited new friends, people I never imagined would one day sit beside me at my table to talk about loss, about boundaries, about how to open your door without letting the wrong people into your heart. I worked at the fund in the mornings, answering emails, arranging grants, turning pain into protective measures for others. In the afternoons, I learned how to cook for one person to set one empty chair, because emptiness is sometimes the space the heart needs to keep going. And in the evenings, I read to Wyatt the little books Henry once loved. Every spring, the daffodils Henry planted in our front yard bloomed a quiet strip of yellow, rising from damp earth row after row like small promises he still kept for me. I watered them, touched their delicate petals, and thought about how he had quietly prepared for every possibility, how he had placed his faith in signatures and paperwork in 2 words, protection and endurance. One morning, I stood on the porch hands around a warm cup of coffee, looking out at the daffodils in the mist, and realized I was no longer tied to the anger I once carried. Instead, there was something lighter, like a sheet of paper being lifted from an old clip, like an object returned to where it truly belonged. Sloane and I didn't return to being close sisters like we were when we were young. That was impossible. But we found a new rhythm better than a rope pulled tight with resentment. We held each other at a conscious distance, meeting with intention, leaving no room for wrongdoing to hide in silence. In therapy, I still remembered Dr. Meredith Hayes's words. Compassion has boundaries, Bridget. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're a hedge. I planted more daffodil bulbs in the fall, digging the earth, with my hands setting them down like laying bricks for a new home. That small act, the hand in the soil, the buttoning of a coat, the steady breath, was how I taught myself to keep living. One night after a fund meeting, when everything had been sorted neatly across the table, I stood in the living room looking at Henry's photographs on the shelf. The velvet soft smile, a small scratch on the frame I still hadn't dared to wipe, and I felt my heart open in a way I never thought possible, not forgetting, but accepting. Not letting go, but holding differently, more gently. I thought of what Henry's foresight had given me. His documents had protected me from ruin. His journal had affirmed the experiences my family tried to erase. His love sheltered me, even after he was gone. But I also recognized my own strength. I had faced a deep betrayal while drowning in grief, navigated complex legal battles, made decisions that balanced justice and compassion, and emerged intact. I whispered to my husband's memory, "Your love still protects me." And for the first time, after a long year, I felt that sentence was true, gentle, steady, and still living with me in every breath. If you've stayed until this moment, thank you for staying with my story. Leave a comment to let me know which country you're watching from and how you feel after hearing this journey. If you want to keep walking with stories of healing, of rising again after betrayal and loss, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. I'll see you in the next story. And remember, broken hearts can bloom again.